You have touched this book before. Have you not? The old curator's voice drifted softly through the dim archive room, nearly swallowed by the rain tapping against the tall museum windows. Evelyn Carter looked up from the leather-bound volume resting beneath her hands. Dust floated through the amber light above them like drifting ash. I do not think so, she answered quietly, but the lie settled strangely in her chest. Her fingers remained on the cracked silver leather cover. Cold. Worn smooth with age. The embossed wolf crest pressed faintly into her skin as if it recognized her touch. Outside, gray hollow drowned beneath November rain. The streets of the small Oregon town shimmered beneath pale streetlights, empty except for passing headlights and the distant sound of tires cutting through wet pavement. Inside the museum, everything smelled of cedarwood, old paper and candle wax. The curator watched her carefully from across the table. You stopped breathing when you saw it, he murmured. Evelyn forced a small smile and opened the ancient book carefully. The spine groaned softly. Most of the pages were filled with symbols she should not have understood. Yet somehow she did. A strange pressure settled behind her ribs as her eyes moved across the faded ink. Moon. Oath. Bloodline. Return. The words appeared in her mind before she consciously translated them. A chill traveled slowly down her arms. Then she noticed the black wax seal hidden inside the front cover. A wolf. Crowned. Royal. Her pulse stumbled. The lights above them flickered once. Then the front doors of the museum opened. Cold wind swept through the dark hallway. Evelyn turned instinctively. A man stood beneath the entrance archway in a long black winter cloak dusted with snow. Water dripped quietly from the edges of his gloves onto the marble floor. He carried no umbrella despite the storm outside. For one strange second, the entire museum seemed to fall silent around him. The courier removed a silver envelope from inside his coat. For Miss Evelyn Carter. His voice remained formal, controlled. The curator went pale before Evelyn even accepted it. Heavy black wax sealed the envelope shut. The same crowned wolf. Her throat tightened. This cannot be real, the curator whispered. Evelyn carefully broke the seal. The parchment inside was thick and pale beneath her fingertips. Miss Evelyn Carter. By royal request, your presence is required in Frostmere immediately regarding the translation of recovered historical material belonging to the Northern Crown. Transportation has already been arranged. At the bottom of the page, written in sharp black ink, Rowan Blackmore. Even the name felt cold. Evelyn had heard stories about Frostmere her entire life. Everyone had. The Winter Kingdom hidden deep beyond the northern mountains. Ancient castles. Snow-covered forests. A king people rarely spoke about directly, especially after dark. The lights overhead flickered again. Something slipped from inside the envelope and drifted onto the wooden table beside her. A second sheet, covered entirely in ancient symbols. The moment Evelyn looked at them, her breath caught painfully in her chest. Because she understood every single word instantly. The curator stared at her in alarm. What does it say? Evelyn swallowed slowly. I do not know. But that was not true either. Hours later, the night train carved north through endless snowfall beneath a silver moon. Evelyn sat alone beside the frost-covered window, wrapped in her wool coat with the strange document spread carefully across her lap. Outside, dark forests blurred endlessly past the glass. Inside the quiet train car, the rhythmic sound of steel wheels against the tracks settled into her bones like a heartbeat. She copied the symbols slowly into her notebook, line after line, without hesitation, as if memory guided her hand. The final sentence appeared beneath her pen before she realized she was writing it. Her stomach turned cold, because she had never seen those words before tonight. Yet somehow she already knew how the sentence ended. The train suddenly lurched violently. Metal groaned. Passengers stirred awake in confusion. Then everything stopped. Complete silence swallowed the tracks. Evelyn looked out the window. Snow drifted across endless black forests beneath the moonlight. No station. No lights. Nothing. And somewhere in the distance beyond the frozen trees, something howled once into the dark. By the time the train reached Frostmere, dawn had disappeared behind storm clouds. Snow swept across the station platform in silver waves, driven sideways by sharp northern wind. Evelyn stepped down carefully with her suitcase clutched against her coat, immediately overwhelmed by the cold biting through her gloves. Everything felt quieter here. Not peaceful. Controlled. The city beyond the station rose from the snowfall like something carved from another century. Black stone towers disappeared into white fog. Iron lanterns flickered along frozen streets. Horse-drawn carriages moved slowly through the storm beside dark luxury vehicles dusted with snow. No one smiled. Even conversations remained hushed. A royal attendant waited beside the station exit holding a black umbrella. Tall. Severe. Dressed in charcoal gray. Miss Carter. She nodded carefully. The king is expecting you. Not welcomes you. Not requested. Expecting. The ride through Frostmere passed in silence except for the storm striking the windows. Evelyn watched cathedral spires and ancient bridges emerge through snowfall, while her stomach tightened with every mile closer to Blackmore Castle. The kingdom felt alive in a strange way. Watching. When the castle finally appeared above the cliffs, Evelyn forgot to breathe. Massive black towers rose against the white sky like frozen shadows. Thousands of windows glimmered faintly beneath snowfall. Snow-covered banners bearing the crowned wolf crest hung from stone battlements. Beautiful. And deeply unsettling. Inside, the royal halls glowed with candlelight reflecting against polished marble floors. Servants moved quietly through endless corridors carrying silver trays and stacks of documents. No laughter echoed through the castle. Only footsteps. And silence. Evelyn was escorted into the throne hall just after sunset. The doors opened slowly before her. Warm golden light spilled across black stone. The room itself was enormous. Cathedral ceilings vanished into shadow overhead, while hundreds of candles burned along the walls. Nobles lined both sides of the hall in dark winter formal wear, their conversations immediately dying the moment she entered. Then Evelyn saw him. Rowan Blackmore sat motionless upon the throne at the far end of the hall. Black coat. Silver eyes. Stillness so complete it felt unnatural. He did not lean forward. Did not shift. Did not blink. The king looked less like a man and more like part of the castle itself. Cold. Ancient. Untouchable. Evelyn's pulse stumbled painfully. A royal archivist approached her carrying an iron case. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked it. Inside rested a narrow silver ring engraved with ancient symbols. "We recovered this beneath the Eastern Cathedral ruins last week," the archivist explained quietly. "No one has translated the inscription." Every eye in the throne hall settled on Evelyn. The silence became unbearable. She swallowed and lifted the ring carefully beneath candlelight. The symbols immediately sharpened in her mind, like memory returning. Before she could stop herself, the words slipped softly from her lips. "The bond remembers what the crown forgets." The moment the sentence ended, Rowan Blackmore stood. Torches lining the throne hall extinguished one after another with soft bursts of smoke. Darkness rolled across the chamber. A collective breath caught among the nobles. Several lowered their heads instantly, because apparently this never happened. The king descended the throne steps slowly. Not hurried. Not angry. Worse. Controlled. Every footstep echoed through the hall like distant thunder. "Read it again." His voice remained low. Calm. But something beneath the restraint made Evelyn's hands tremble. She lifted her eyes fully toward him for the first time. Silver. His eyes were completely silver beneath the candlelight. Not gray. Not blue. Silver. And suddenly she understood why no one in Frostmere spoke his name casually. Evelyn forced herself to breathe. "The bond remembers what the crown forgets," she repeated quietly. This time Rowan stopped directly in front of her, close enough for her to notice the faint scar disappearing beneath the collar of his black coat, close enough to hear his breathing catch unevenly for one brief second before he controlled it again. Evelyn instinctively stepped backward. Her shoulder touched the cold marble pillar behind her. Rowan froze inches away. Then slowly, his gloved hand lifted slightly toward her face. Not touching. Almost remembering. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Not anger. Not shock. Something far more dangerous. Recognition. His hand lowered again immediately. The entire hall remained silent around them. Then finally, quietly enough that only she could hear it. "Who taught you those words? Who taught you those words?" The question lingered between them long after the throne hall fell silent again. Evelyn could still feel every eye in the room watching her. Nobles stood motionless beneath the dim candlelight, pretending not to listen while listening to every breath. Snow rattled softly against the towering stained glass windows behind the throne. "I do not know those words," Evelyn answered carefully. "Not really." Rowan Blackmore studied her face without blinking. For one unbearable moment, she thought he might call her a liar. Instead, he turned toward the royal archivist standing near the stairs. "Prepare the North Archive." The older man stiffened immediately. "Your Majesty, you will work inside the North Archive from now on," Rowan said quietly, his attention returning to Evelyn. "The restricted archive." A ripple of tension passed through the hall. Several nobles exchanged alarmed glances. Evelyn frowned slightly. "Restricted. It is safer." The answer came too quickly. Not colder. Not sharper. Personal. Before she could ask what exactly she needed protection from, Rowan stepped away from her and ascended the throne stairs again. His black coat swept across the marble like moving shadow. The audience was over. Just like that. Hours later, Evelyn followed the royal archivist through the northern wing of Blackmore Castle, while snowstorm winds screamed beyond the narrow windows. The elderly man introduced himself quietly as Harold Whittaker. He carried a ring of iron keys that shook faintly in his hands the entire walk. "No outsider has entered the North Archive in decades," he admitted. "That sounds comforting," Evelyn murmured. The old man almost smiled. Almost. They descended narrow stone stairs lit only by candle sconces. The deeper they traveled into the castle, the colder the air became. Ancient portraits lined the walls in heavy black frames, their painted silver-eyed monarchs seeming to watch her pass. At the bottom of the staircase stood enormous iron doors carved with faded lunar symbols. Harold hesitated before unlocking them. "You should avoid staying here after midnight," he whispered carefully. "Why?" The old archivist glanced upward instinctively, as if the castle itself might overhear. "The North Wing remembers things." Before Evelyn could ask what that meant, the doors groaned open. Warm candlelight revealed endless shelves disappearing into darkness. Thousands of books filled the massive circular chamber from floor to ceiling. Ladders climbed between towering cases of ancient manuscripts, while snow beat softly against the stained glass dome overhead. Beautiful. And deeply lonely. Harold placed a stack of royal records onto a nearby table. "You will remain here during the storm," he explained. "Most servants avoid this part of the castle during winter nights." "Why does everyone speak in riddles here?" The old man looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Because Frostmere survives on silence." Then, without another word, he stepped outside. The iron doors sealed shut behind him. Heavy locks clicked into place one after another. Evelyn turned sharply. "You are locking me in?" Harold's muffled voice came through the door. "For your safety, Miss Carter." The silence afterward felt enormous. Outside, the storm worsened. Snow slammed against the stained glass while candle flames trembled in their holders. Evelyn removed her gloves slowly and wandered deeper into the archive, trying to ignore the strange pressure building inside her chest. Hours passed. At some point, exhaustion blurred into curiosity. She climbed a narrow ladder beside the western shelves, searching for records about the bond phrase she had spoken earlier. Dust coated her fingertips. The old wood creaked beneath her boots. Then her eyes caught something unusual hidden behind black cloth near the highest shelf. Portrait. Evelyn carefully pulled the fabric away. Her breath stopped. A queen stood painted beside one of the former kings of Frostmere. Dark gown. Pale skin. Soft eyes lifted toward the silver-eyed monarch beside her. She looked almost exactly like Evelyn. Not identical, but close enough to make her stomach twist painfully. The ladder shifted suddenly beneath her. One step slipped sideways. Evelyn gasped softly as her balance vanished. Then a black-gloved hand caught her wrist instantly. Firm. Steady. Warm despite the cold. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. Rowan stood below her, one hand gripping the ladder while the other held her securely in place. "When were you planning to sleep?" he asked quietly. Evelyn struggled to breathe normally. "I thought kings usually slept before midnight." His expression barely changed. "They do. Slowly, carefully, he helped her descend the final steps. But even after her boots touched the floor again, he did not let go immediately. His thumb brushed lightly across the faint scar near her wrist. Everything inside him seemed to still. Evelyn looked up. Something dangerous flickered through Rowan's silver eyes. Recognition. And this time fear. Fear. The realization vanished from Rowan's expression almost immediately, but Evelyn had already seen it. His hand released her wrist slowly. The warmth disappeared with it. For several seconds neither of them moved inside the silent archive. Snow battered the stained glass dome overhead while candlelight trembled softly across the endless shelves. Then Rowan stepped back first. "This marriage changes nothing." The words arrived coldly. Controlled. Too fast. Evelyn blinked in confusion. Marriage. Rowan's jaw tightened once, almost invisible beneath the shadows. By morning the entire castle knew. Servants avoided looking directly at Evelyn as she crossed the eastern corridor escorted by palace attendants. Nobles whispered openly behind gloved hands while silver bells echoed through the winter halls announcing an emergency royal decree. Outside, snow continued falling across Frostmere in thick white waves. Inside, the atmosphere had sharpened into something fragile and dangerous. Lady Miriam Vale, the king's senior advisor, walked beside Evelyn through the candlelit passage leading toward the royal chapel. Elegant and severe in dark blue silk, she carried herself with the calm exhaustion of someone accustomed to cleaning disasters. "You should understand something clearly," Lady Miriam said softly. "His Majesty does not act impulsively. That is not comforting." "No," the older woman admitted. "It rarely is." The engagement ceremony began shortly before sunset. Hundreds of candles illuminated the grand hall in warm gold against black marble floors. Snow drifted slowly beyond towering windows while musicians played quietly somewhere beneath the vaulted ceilings. Evelyn stood beneath the royal crest feeling painfully out of place. Her dress had been prepared overnight by palace attendants. Dark silver velvet. Long sleeves. Winter formal wear worthy of a queen she had never agreed to become. Across the hall, Rowan Blackmore signed the royal decree without once looking at her. Council members surrounded him with stacks of documents while priests prepared ceremonial vows near the altar. Every noble in attendance watched the king carefully. But they watched Evelyn even more. Outsider. Foreigner. Unknown. She could almost hear the thoughts behind their silence. This alliance weakens the bloodline. She is nobody. The king has lost his judgment. The whispers spread quietly through the hall like smoke. Evelyn kept her spine straight anyway. Then one councilman stepped beside her abruptly. Tall. Sharp-faced. Irritated. "You are standing in the wrong place," he said under his breath before reaching for her wrist to move her aside. The entire room changed instantly. "Do not." Rowan's voice cut through the hall quietly from across the chamber. Not loud. Not angry. Far worse. Every conversation stopped immediately. The councilman froze mid-motion before slowly releasing Evelyn's wrist as though burned by the mistake. Fear drained the color from his face. Rowan never raised his voice again. He simply returned to signing the decree. But no one approached Evelyn after that. The ceremony ended hours later beneath heavy snowfall. Evelyn barely remembered most of it. The vows. The formal bows. The endless eyes watching her become something she did not understand. Queen-to-be. The title felt unreal inside her chest. Long after midnight, exhaustion finally drove her back toward the private chambers assigned to her in the northern wing. The castle had grown quiet by then. Only distant footsteps and the crackling of fireplaces disturbed the silence. When Evelyn entered her room, she stopped immediately. A tray of untouched dinner rested near the fire. Still warm. Beside it lay a folded black winter cloak. Heavy wool. Silver stitching. The scent of cold cedar and winter smoke lingering faintly in the fabric. Rowan's confusion tightened painfully inside her. Because no servant would dare leave the king's personal cloak behind carelessly. Slowly, Evelyn touched the fabric. Something crinkled softly inside the pocket. She reached in carefully and pulled out a single pressed white flower. Small. Delicate. Frozen perfectly between folded parchment. Oregon snowbell. A flower that only grew near Gray Hollow. Her breath caught sharply. How could he possibly? A quiet sound interrupted her. Footsteps outside her chamber. Slow. Measured. Familiar. Evelyn crossed the room and opened the door carefully. The corridor beyond glowed softly beneath candlelight. And there he was. Rowan stood alone near the arched window at the end of the hallway, reading from a stack of royal reports beneath flickering golden light. Snow still clung to the shoulders of his black coat, slowly melting onto the stone floor beneath him. He had been standing there long enough for the storm to follow him inside. As if he had not moved for hours. As if leaving had become difficult. Rowan slowly lifted his eyes toward her. Neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn noticed something that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. He was no longer reading the reports at all. He had been staring at her door. The next morning, Frostmere Castle woke beneath pale silver sunlight and endless snow. Evelyn had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rowan standing outside her chamber beneath candlelight, snow melting from his shoulders while he stared silently at her door as if guarding something fragile. Or someone. The thought unsettled her more than it should have. By late morning, Lady Miriam escorted her through the lower palace corridors toward the royal records chamber. Servants hurried quietly around them carrying trays of tea, folded linens, and stacks of sealed documents while winter wind rattled the stained glass windows overhead. The castle remained beautiful in daylight, but colder somehow, more exposed. As they passed through the kitchens, Evelyn noticed the sudden silence falling among the servants. Heads lowered respectfully the moment Rowan entered from the opposite corridor. He moved through the castle without bodyguards, without announcement. Still, everyone seemed to feel him before seeing him. A young kitchen servant nearly dropped a tray of crystal glasses while stepping aside too quickly. The girl could not have been older than 17. "I am sorry, Your Majesty." Her hands trembled violently. Evelyn expected irritation, perhaps indifference. Instead, Rowan bent slightly and steadied the tray before the glasses could slide. "Careful, Nora." The servant froze. Not because he corrected her, because he remembered her name. The girl stared at him with visible shock before whispering a shaky thank you. Rowan only nodded once and continued walking. Evelyn found herself watching him differently after that. "You remember everyone's names," she said quietly once the corridor emptied again. Rowan glanced toward her without slowing his pace. "What?" The answer came almost defensively, as though kindness embarrassed him more than cruelty ever could. For the first time since arriving in Frostmere, Evelyn nearly smiled. Something unreadable flickered across Rowan's expression the moment he noticed. And unexpectedly, he looked away second. The realization settled warm and dangerous somewhere deep inside her chest. That evening, the winter court banquet filled the grand hall with music and gold candlelight. Nobles gathered beneath crystal chandeliers wearing black velvet, silver embroidery, and ceremonial winter furs while servants moved carefully between tables carrying wine and steaming platters. Snow drifted endlessly outside the towering windows. Evelyn sat beside Rowan near the raised royal platform, trying not to feel the weight of hundreds of watching eyes. Everything in Frostmere seemed built around silence. Even judgment arrived quietly here. Halfway through the banquet, an elderly duke approached carrying an ancient ceremonial glass carved from pale crystal. "A wedding blessing from House Evermont," he announced proudly. The fragile glass was passed toward Evelyn. Too quickly. Her fingers slipped slightly against the smooth surface. The crystal shattered against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the hall like breaking ice. Conversation stopped instantly. Several nobles exchanged sharp looks. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "I am so sorry," she began quietly. No, Rowan's voice interrupted calmly. Every eye shifted toward him. The king rose slowly from his chair and looked toward the stunned duke. "The glass was already fractured," Rowan said evenly. "It should never have been presented." The lie was obvious and intentional. Shock rippled through the room. No ruler protected someone politically beneath them that openly. Not here. Not in Frostmere. The duke bowed immediately despite obvious confusion. "Of course, Your Majesty." Evelyn stared at Rowan in disbelief while servants hurried forward to clear the shattered pieces. He never looked at her directly again during the banquet, but somehow that made it worse. Because he had protected her without asking for gratitude, without even acknowledging what he had done. Hours later, long after the banquet ended, Evelyn stepped onto the northern balcony unable to sleep. The night air cut sharply against her skin. Snow blanketed the castle rooftops beneath silver moonlight, while distant cathedral bells echoed softly through Frostmere below. Beautiful. Lonely. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself against the cold. Then warmth settled suddenly across her shoulders. Heavy black wool. Startled, Evelyn turned. Rowan stood behind her holding the edges of his cloak around her carefully. "You will freeze," he said quietly. Close enough now that she could see exhaustion shadowing his silver eyes beneath the moonlight. Before she could answer, he stepped back again, always retreating after moments that felt too honest. Rowan turned toward the balcony doors as though preparing to leave. Without thinking, Evelyn reached forward and caught the edge of his sleeve. The movement surprised both of them. He stopped instantly. Snow drifted silently between them. And for one dangerous second, neither of them let go first. Snow drifted between them in soft silver spirals. Evelyn still held the edge of Rowan's sleeve, and he was allowing it. The realization settled slowly through the cold night air, heavier than it should have been. Frostmere Castle stretched silently below them beneath moonlight and snowfall, distant lanterns glowing across the kingdom like scattered embers. Rowan lowered his eyes briefly toward her hand gripping his coat. "You should rest," he said quietly. But he did not move away. Neither did she. By morning, the fragile stillness between them had vanished. The diplomatic council from the southern territories arrived just after sunrise. Carriages lined the frozen courtyard while servants hurried through the castle preparing for meetings that would determine winter trade routes and military agreements. Tension filled every corridor. Lady Miriam intercepted Evelyn outside the North Archive with unusual urgency. "The council expects you beside the king today." Evelyn frowned. "Why?" "Because the kingdom has already begun speaking about you." Not kindly. The unspoken words lingered heavily between them. The diplomatic gathering took place inside Frostmere's Eastern Council chamber shortly before noon. Massive windows overlooked snow-covered cliffs while long black banners hung between candlelit pillars. Advisors, nobles, and foreign delegates filled the room with carefully controlled smiles and sharpened politeness. Rowan stood at the head of the chamber in black formal wear, silver cufflinks glinting beneath winter light. Untouchable. Until his eyes found Evelyn entering beside Lady Miriam. Something in his posture eased almost invisibly. Only for a second. The negotiations began immediately. Trade disputes. Border concerns. Winter supply. Shortages. Every conversation carried hidden pressure beneath polished language. And eventually, inevitably, the attention shifted toward Evelyn. Lord Hastings from the Southern Territories smiled pleasantly while stirring cream into his coffee. "We were surprised by the king's engagement announcement," he remarked casually. "Frostmere has always valued tradition." The room quieted. Evelyn understood the insult instantly. Not noble enough. Not royal enough. Not one of them. Before Rowan could respond, another diplomat added softly, "It is admirable when rulers embrace unconventional alliances." Lady Miriam stiffened beside her. The silence sharpened dangerously. Then Evelyn spoke first. "Unconventional things tend to frighten people," she said calmly. "Especially when they cannot control them." Several council members looked startled. Lord Hastings forced a thin smile. "And do you believe you understand Frostmere already, Miss Carter?" "No," Evelyn answered honestly. "But I think fear speaks the same language everywhere." The room fell silent again. Across the table, Rowan watched her differently now. Not protective. Not cautious. Something quieter. Something dangerously close to admiration. The remainder of the meeting shifted after that. Questions softened. Tension eased slightly. Even the southern delegates became more careful with their words. But Evelyn noticed something else. Rowan had barely spoken at all afterward. He simply observed her. Like he was seeing someone unexpected emerge in front of him. The meeting ended early. Too early. As servants cleared the chamber, Lady Miriam approached Rowan quietly. "Your Majesty, the Western delegation still requires. Cancel the remaining meetings." Shock crossed several faces instantly. "Sir?" one advisor asked carefully. Rowan's expression never changed. "Tomorrow." No one argued. Kings and Frostmere were apparently obeyed without question. Hours later, snowstorms rolled back across the kingdom by nightfall. Wind howled against the cathedral towers while candles flickered throughout the castle corridors. Evelyn wandered the northern halls, unable to sleep again. Something about the council meeting lingered inside her chest. The way Rowan had looked at her afterward unsettled her more than the insults themselves. Not because it frightened her, because it did not. Eventually she noticed faint candlelight beneath the doors of the old chapel near the eastern wing. Curiosity pulled her forward. Inside, the cathedral-like room glowed softly beneath rows of flickering candles. Snow tapped gently against stained glass while ancient stone saints watched silently from the shadows. And Rowan stood alone near the altar. No crown. No royal coat. No guards. Just exhaustion. His dark shirt sleeves were rolled slightly at the wrists, silver hair falling loosely across his forehead as he braced one hand against the cold stone table before him. For the first time since meeting him, he looked tired enough to break. Evelyn stepped carefully into the chapel. The sound made Rowan look up immediately, and just as quickly he stepped backward. Instinctive. Controlled. As if closeness itself had become dangerous. The movement hurt more than she expected. "You do not have to avoid me," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "You do not understand this kingdom." There it is again. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly. "You keep deciding what is safe for me." The words landed harder than anger would have. Rowan turned away toward the candlelit windows. "You do not understand what follows this crown. Then let me." Silence filled the chapel. Heavy. Breathing. Alive. Something inside Rowan visibly cracked beneath it. When he finally spoke again, his voice dropped lower than before. "I do not know how to keep people." The confession barely sounded intentional, more like something dragged from him by exhaustion. Evelyn's chest tightened painfully, and for the first time the Monster King looked lonely. The chapel remained silent long after Rowan's confession faded into the candlelight. "I do not know how to keep people." The words settled somewhere deep inside Evelyn's chest, heavier than the winter air surrounding them. Outside, snow continued falling across Frostmere in endless silver sheets, while cathedral bells echoed faintly through the sleeping kingdom. Rowan stood motionless near the altar. Afterward, as if he regretted speaking honestly the moment the truth escaped him, Evelyn should have stepped away, should have given him distance. Instead she stayed, and somehow that seemed to unsettle him even more. 3 nights later, Frostmere gathered beneath the full moon for the winter rite. The sacred ceremony had existed longer than the kingdom itself. Nobles dressed in black ceremonial velvet filled the grand cathedral, while priests lit hundreds of silver candles along the marble aisles. Snow drifted softly through the open arches overhead, melting slowly against heated stone floors. The atmosphere felt ancient, reverent, dangerously expectant. Lady Miriam adjusted the silver clasp on Evelyn's dark winter cloak before the ceremony began. "You should remain close to the king tonight," she murmured carefully. "Why?" The older woman hesitated. "Because strange things have already begun happening since your arrival." That answer did not help. At the center of the cathedral, Rowan Blackmore stood beneath moonlight wearing formal ceremonial black embroidered with silver thread. Without his crown, he looked less like a ruler and more like something carved from the night itself. Beautiful. Lonely. Untouchable. Yet the moment his silver eyes found Evelyn entering the cathedral, something inside his expression softened almost invisibly. The ceremony began with ancient vows spoken in Frostmere's old language. Priests circled the marble platform carrying silver lanterns while low choral music echoed through the cathedral walls. Evelyn tried focusing on the ritual itself, but every instinct kept pulling her attention back toward Rowan, toward the tension surrounding him, toward the strange ache building beneath her ribs whenever he looked at her too long. Then Rowan spoke. One final phrase in the ancient language rolled through the cathedral beneath his deep, controlled voice. The sound struck Evelyn like memory. Before she could stop herself, she answered instinctively. The forgotten final line slipped softly from her lips. Complete. Perfect. Ancient. The entire cathedral froze. But not because of her. Because Rowan Blackmore stopped breathing. The king stood, utterly motionless beneath the moonlight. Priests stared in confusion. Nobles exchanged alarmed glances. No one understood what had just happened, except him. Slowly, Rowan turned toward Evelyn. His silver eyes looked almost unreal now. Not cold. Not controlled. Shattered. Say it again. The words barely sounded like a command, more like disbelief. Evelyn's pulse thundered painfully inside her chest. Every person in the cathedral watched them now, but suddenly the room felt impossibly distant, as if only the two of them remained. Without fully understanding why, she repeated the ancient phrase quietly. The moment the final word left her lips, the sacred markings carved into the cathedral floor ignited beneath her feet. Silver light spread across the marble in glowing patterns older than the kingdom itself. Gasps echoed throughout the cathedral. Several priests dropped immediately to one knee. Lady Miriam covered her mouth in shock. For centuries, one elder whispered faintly, the rite has never answered anyone. But Rowan never looked at the glowing symbols. He only looked at Evelyn, like the world had narrowed entirely to her standing beneath the moonlight. The silence between them turned unbearably intimate, dangerously soft. Then slowly, his hand lifted toward her face. Publicly, a king touching his future queen during sacred rites should not have felt scandalous. Yet every noble in the cathedral seemed unable to breathe. Because this was Rowan Blackmore, the untouchable king. And he was looking at Evelyn like she had just undone something inside him. Evelyn should have stepped back. Instead, she let him touch her. His black-gloved fingers brushed softly against her cheek beneath the silver light. Warm, careful, almost trembling. The contact lasted only seconds. But Rowan closed his eyes briefly the moment he touched her. Relief crossed his face first. Then ache. Then something far more dangerous. Need. Not physical. Something deeper. Lonelier. The emotion vanished almost immediately beneath restraint, as though he realized too late that the entire cathedral was watching him unravel. Rowan withdrew his hand suddenly and stepped back. Distance returned. Instantly. Too quickly. The cold absence of him startled Evelyn more than the touch itself. Whispers spread through the cathedral now. Nervous. Confused. Fearful. The glowing symbols beneath Evelyn's feet slowly dimmed again. But Rowan still looked at her like he no longer trusted himself near her. Then one of the elder priests stepped forward shakily beneath the moonlight, and quietly asked the question no one else dared to speak aloud. Your Majesty, what exactly has awakened? What exactly has awakened? The elder priest's voice trembled softly beneath the cathedral dome. No one answered. The sacred symbols carved into the marble floor had already faded back into darkness, but the silence left behind felt heavier now. Nobles whispered anxiously among themselves while silver candlelight flickered across frightened faces. Rowan Blackmore remained perfectly still beside Evelyn. Too still. As if any movement might reveal something he no longer knew how to hide. Then finally the king spoke. The ceremony is over. His voice returned cold. Controlled. Untouchable. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Priests lowered their heads. Council members stepped backward. No one questioned him further. But Evelyn noticed the slight tightening in Rowan's jaw before he turned away. Fear. Not of the ritual. Of her. The realization followed her through the castle long after midnight. Snowstorms rolled across Frostmere again the next morning, covering the kingdom in silver-white silence. Wind rattled the stained glass windows of the North Archive, while servants moved uneasily through the corridors carrying stacks of sealed council documents. Something had changed after the winter rite.